Hello, everybody. Today we will be starting lesson 9. And from lesson 9, we all know that the second part of the syllabus starts. First part we have already completed, which included the various functions of management, and the first book is done. So we start the second book, and it starts with the lesson financial management. Before understanding what is financial management, we have to understand the concept of business finance. So, we all know that finance is something which is required for different types of business activities. Business activities may be related with industry, it may be related with commerce, it may be related with trade. And each and every activity, there is need of finance. Without funds, the business cannot operate. That is why business finance means the funds which is required for carrying out business activities or business operations. Now, when we say, we have learned in class 11th in the very first chapter of Introduction to Business that business activities, they are basically divided into industry and commerce. And commerce includes trade and auxiliaries to trade. So you can imagine different types of activities may be involved in business activities. And for each and every activity related with business operation, there is need for funds. So the question arises, why is there need for funds in business? Why funds are required in business? Or what are the various activities related with business which requires funds? So sometimes to establish business there is need for funds. Sometimes to run business there is need for funds. Sometimes for expansion, diversification or modernization there is need for funds. Sometimes there is need to purchase assets. Assets may be tangible, it may be intangible. Tangible assets means those assets which can be touched, which can be seen. For example, machines, building, land, they have physical existence. An intangible asset means those assets which cannot be touched or seen, but it can be felt. Because trademarks, patents, these are all intangible assets. But to secure a business, sometimes the business also requires to patent its products. It requires trademark of the product so that it can be recognized. And these things, they can be availed at some value. So fund is required for it. To get patent, to get trademark for the product. Also, for meeting the day-to-day requirements of the business, that is working capital requirements of the business, there is need for funds. Those day-to-day requirements may be in the form of payment of salary or wage, or in the form of payment of rent, or in the form of payment of insurance premium, or for purchase of stationery, or for paying commission. So for different types of daily requirements, there is need for funds. So overall, we can understand that for smooth conduct, survival and growth of business, there is need for fund at each and every step of conducting business. And that is why we have seen that finance is considered to be lifeblood of business. You can understand the significance of finance with the statement. Sometimes it is said finance is the lifeblood of business. As the blood in the human body provides life, similarly finance provides life to business. Without it, the business cannot prosper, the business cannot run, the business cannot be established. That is why it is considered something to be very, very important. Now, after understanding the concept of business finance, we move to financial management. That means funds which the business organization raises or avails for different types of business activities, that has to be properly managed. Financial management is related with managing of funds in a proper manner, so that always the organization benefits by managing it properly. So what should be done for financial management? When can the funds be said to be managed properly? We can understand it by learning about financial management. So financial management is basically concerned with optimum procurement as well as usage of funds. Funds which is raised by any business organization, it has to be optimally procured, and after procuring the funds, procuring means obtaining the funds, it has to be properly used. Because we have to understand one thing, that funds come at some cost. From whichever source we may be raising funds, there are different sources through which the funds can be raised. In class 11th, there was a chapter of sources of finance, in which you all have learnt about the different sources. Some of the sources are owned sources, some of the sources are borrowed sources of funds. Owned sources is also called internal sources of funds, and when we say borrowed sources, they are external sources. That is from outside the organization. The funds are raised, and those funds may be raised from banks, from financial institutions, in the form of debts, in the form of debentures, in the form of public deposits. But whatever may be the source, always, whether it is internal source or external source, the funds are availed at some cost. Funds doesn't come free of cost. So if you have to pay for raising the funds, then those funds have to be properly utilized. That is why financial management is concerned basically with optimum procurement and also optimum usage of funds. Financial management, so on the whole, has two functions. First function is optimal procurement of funds, and second function is optimal usage of funds. Now, how can funds be optimally procured? For that, what has to be done in an organization by the financial manager who has to manage the funds? Financial manager has to first of all find out the various sources. That means identify the various sources from where the funds can be raised. And those sources, they may be in the form of owned funds or they may be in the form of borrowed funds. So it may be internal source or it may be external source. After identifying the source, each and every source of fund has to be evaluated. How it has to be evaluated? On the basis of cost and risk which is associated with raising funds from the various sources. That means what will be the overall cost of raising funds from a particular source and how much risk will be involved in raising the fund from a particular source. And after evaluating the cost and risk factor of the various sources, there is need to select that source which is cheapest from amongst all and it involves minimum risk. Then only it will be said to be optimal procurement of funds. So the question here is raised. What is meant by optimal procurement of fund? That means raising funds or procuring funds from the source which is cheapest and the risk is under control. So procurement is always done keeping in mind, always remember, keeping in mind two things, the cost and the risk factor. After the funds have been raised or procured from various sources, also financial management says that those funds have to be properly utilized. So usage of funds, optimum usage of funds is also a part of financial management. So when can we say that there has been optimal usage of fund in a business organization? Whenever the fund which has been raised, that is invested in such a way that return on investment is greater than cost of investment. Whenever the fund is raised, that will be invested, that raised fund that will be invested in some or the other project or proposal. So it has to be calculated how much return is coming out from that investment. If the return on investment is greater than cost of investment or cost of fund, it can be said that the funds have been properly utilized. That is why the return is coming more. If cost is of fund is 10% and return is coming on the basis of 15%, always it is said to be a profitable investment. Also, optimal usage of fund means effective, efficient and profitable deployment of fund. Because always the funds, whenever they are raised at a cost, it has to be invested in such a way that it is lucrative. That means it is turning out to be profitable venture. Because it is the shareholders who have to bear, who are considered as the owners of the fund, who have to bear the cost of raising funds. And why do they bear that cost? With an expectation that whatever investment the organization will be doing by raising the fund, it is going to give them good returns. That means their wealth is going to increase overall, and that will be profitable deployment of funds. And if the wealth is increased, always that is repaid to the shareholders in the form of dividend payout. Also, usage of funds should be in such a manner that neither there is excess funds nor there is shortage of funds in the organization. Whenever the fund is required in the organization for meeting the business expenses, that fund is available in the organization. That means management of fund has been done in such a manner, and it has been done in a way that idle cash is also not lying. That means neither there is excess nor shortage of funds. Because if the funds are in excess, not being utilized, that means the business is sacrificing its profit. And if there is shortage of funds when it is needed, then it is going to impact the working of the business. So it should be management of cash should be such in the organization, funds should be such in the organization that neither shortage nor excess funds should be there in the organization. Then only it will be said to be optimal usage of funds. And this is what is financial management. So on the whole, what we understand, two words are the key words. One is optimal procurement and another is optimal usage. So procuring funds in the way that always avail the funds from the cheapest source at minimum risk, and utilize the funds in the way that the return comes greater than the cost of funds, and neither there is excess funds nor there is shortage of funds. Also, there is efficient, effective management of funds, which turns out to be always lucrative, and it gives good returns to the shareholders. That means the wealth of the shareholders increases if they have taken the risk to invest in business. Then only it will be said to be proper financial management decisions. Now, after this, we will be learning about the importance, or it is also said role of financial management. What is the role of financial management in business? With the definition and with the concept, we have understood how important is the financial management decision which is made by the financial manager in the organization. We have understood that financial management decisions, they impact the financial fortune or the financial health of any business. If the decisions are good, we see that always it is sound financial health which the organization has. Otherwise, if the decisions are not taken properly, we see that the financial fortune of the business is always at stake. So this financial fortune or financial health of the business, that is basically reflected in the financial statements which is prepared by each and every organization in the form of balance sheet or in the form of profit and loss account of the business organizations, which gives the overall view of the expenses as well as the revenues which is being generated by any business organization, as well as its capital position, and that creates the image of an organization in the eyes of the public. That means the goodwill that is created. Those financial statements that is released from time to time, that gives the overall picture of the financial health of any business organization. And there are different, you may say, aspects which gets affected by the financial management decisions, which is reflected in the financial statement, about which we are going to learn just now. That is why whenever we talk about the role of financial management, we see that financial management decisions affect the following aspects of financial statements. And these aspects reflect the financial condition or the financial health of any business organization. And that creates the reputation or goodwill of any organization. So, what are those aspects? First of all, we have learned, because these statements are in the form of balance sheet, and balance sheet is a statement of assets and liabilities. So the decisions related with funds, that is going to impact the assets and the liabilities of the business organization. When we say profit and loss account, it gives an account of the expenses, of the revenues which is generated by any business organization in the form of interest which is paid, or in the form of dividend which is paid, or in the form of depreciation. These are all part of profit and loss account, and this gives the overall picture of any business organization. So what are those aspects which is affected by the financial management decisions and is a part of financial statement? First of all, size and composition of fixed assets in business. If a business takes a decision to invest, for example, 50 crores, say, in fixed assets, the size and composition of fixed assets, that is going to increase by that much amount. So the balance sheet will show that. Secondly, with the increase in the size and composition of fixed assets, always there will be commensurate increase in the current assets also. Because what are current assets? Current assets are short-term assets. Short-term assets means those assets which can be converted into cash and its cash equivalent within the period of 1 year. So when the size and composition of fixed assets increase, always it impacts the current assets, because day-to-day requirements of the business, that is also going to increase when the business has invested in huge amount in fixed assets. And that may be in the form of cash, because current assets is broken up into cash, inventories, receivables. So the composition of current assets is also going to change, and it is also going to increase in the form of cash, or in the form of inventories, or in the form of receivables. If the business is having credit policy, then there is more chance that inventories and debtors will be the more. So all those columns in the statements will also be affected. It will be depicted in the financial statement. The third thing which is going to reflect in the financial statement by the financial management decision is the amount of long-term and short-term funds to be used. Because whenever the funds are to be raised, that has to be raised from various sources. And if the source is debt, then whether it will be, debt means the liability, long-term liability or short-term liability. Long-term liability means more than 1 year period, that is considered as long-term. and within one up to 1 year time, that is considered as short term liability. The business organization generally takes the decisions about long term or short term funds, keeping in mind two things. One is liquidity, another is profitability. If the organization wants to remain more liquid, that means if it requires more cash reserves every time in the organization to meet the requirements of the business, it will be considered as more liquid. And in that case, if the organization has to remain more liquid, it is generally that the organization raises funds from long term sources. More liquid is the organization, it goes for long term funds. And the liability column, that is going to be affected by this in balance sheet. But always long term funds as compared to the short term funds are expensive. This has to be understood. So before raising the funds from long term sources, it has to be understood very clearly that it is going to be more expensive as compared to short term liabilities, because short term liabilities are those current liabilities, or it is also called current liabilities. Short term liabilities are those liabilities which has to be repaid within the period of 1 year, and once it has to be repaid within a period of 1 year, it is always considered to be cheaper as compared to the long term liability, for which the payments have to be made for the longer time period. But if the organization is in need for funds, or it has to remain more liquid, always it goes for long term funds as compared to short term funds. And in the financial statement, the liabilities to that amount will be raised by that much amount. Then comes the breakup of, if the organization is going for long term funds. Long term funds may be of two types. One is debt and another is equity. That means owned and borrowed fund. So what is the proportion of debt and equity in total capital? That is also a part of financial statement. Whether there is, it certainly shows whether there is proper optimal mix of debt or equity or not in the capital structure. That is also reflected. Finally, all the items in profit and loss account, for example, interest, expense, depreciation, more is the amount of debt, we will see always interest on debt is going to increase, and that will be shown in the profit and loss account. If the fund has been raised from owned source or equity, we see that dividend payout has to be there. So in the form of interest or expense, or in the form of depreciation, whenever the investment has to be made for long term period in huge amount, that means capital budgeting decisions have to be taken, always the depreciation part also gets affected, because investment is done in fixed assets, and that is what is called capital budgeting decisions. So depreciation is column will also get affected. So on the whole, what do we see? We see that with the financial management decisions, the financial fortune of any business is decided. So whenever a business is taking decisions to raise funds, it has to raise funds in such a way that it is in a position to cover the risk associated with raising funds and also meet the expenses or the cost of raising funds by raising funds from the source which is cheapest for the business organization, so that the fundraising decision turns out to be always profitable for the business organization, and it leads to finally increase in shareholders wealth. With this, we have completed the introduction part of financial management. We have learned about the concept of business finance, what is business finance and why is finance needed in business. Then we also learned about what is financial management, what are the two important aspects or functions of financial management, that means optimal procurement and optimal usage. Why it is said like that in detail, I have tried to make you understand. And then we also learned about the role of financial management decisions, how it is reflected in the financial statement, which states the financial health or the financial fortune of any business, and that creates the image of the business organization in the eyes of people. With this part is done. In the next lecture, we will be talking about the objectives of financial management. Till then, thank you.